Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. My name is Seth Piccirillo. I'm Senior Manager of Economic Development for the Buffalo Niagara Partnership. And welcome to today's Development Advisory Council meeting focused on a safe return to work in a COVID-19 environment. This virtual format is obviously a little bit different than past DAC meetings, but we're confident that the conversation and also the great expert panel that we've put together will add value to your companies as you're navigating reopening. As always, we are very thankful to the DAC Council sponsors that make our work possible. Our industry sponsors, Community Preservation Corporation, Construction Exchange of Buffalo and Western New York, First Amherst Development, Harris Beach PLLC, and our supporting sponsors, ARC Building Partners, CBRE, Labella Associates, LaChase Construction Services, Millington Lockwood, National Grid, and the Bonadillo Group. Before we get into the presentation, just a couple timely updates. The partnership has created a resources and impact page that is directly found on the homepage of our website, thepartnership.org. The resources page allows you to stay up to date on government updates, especially like the safety business template for reopening, which we're going to talk about, financial opportunities, source products, HR best practices, various webisodes that we have been hosting with professional experts. So we hope that you check it out. We went one step further and created the BNP business link, which allows you to ask specific questions based on situations that your company are going through. We answer those questions or we find experts to help you through. That business link is also found on the homepage of our website. Recently, the partnership completed the Western New York COVID Business Impact Survey. We collected data from over 1,800 regional businesses. With reopening upon us, that data is ever valuable and it is available on our website in the blog section. Today, we're going to talk about liability strategy for employers, for individual companies, but it's clear that New York State must enact broader employer liability protection as we all respond to COVID. And we ask that you add your advocacy to our ongoing voter voice campaign on employer liability, which can be found in the advocacy page of our website. The reopening plans for all of our companies are going to be complicated. They're going to be multifaceted, and they're going to include everything from changes to physical space, new human resources policies, enforcement of those policies, and then legal and liability strategies. Today's panelists are going to talk about how those different plans can work together and are necessary. We're very excited to have CBRE Buffalo, Lawley Insurance, Harris Beach, and HB Cornerstone with us today. From CBRE, we have Darby Fishkin and Susan Heimiller. From Lawley, we have Brooke Smith, Jim Perino, Len Summers. From Harris Beach, we have Tracy Lepardi. And from HB Cornerstone, we have Matt Emmons. Before we start the presentation with CBRE, we are going to have a Q&A at the end of this. We're going to do it by written Q&A. On the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button. It allows you to write your question in. Also, if you see another question that is of interest to you, you can upvote it so that gets to the top of the list. If your answer is not given during this presentation, we will make sure that we get you information via email after this presentation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to CBRE. Darby, are you there?
You can't hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay. Sorry. Technology, gotta love it. So good morning. So I said one of the things I thought I'd start by talking about is, one of the most common questions we get is this going to continue, this trend of social distancing? And, obviously if I had a crystal ball, I'd be in a different field. But, CBRE put out some interesting thoughts on the workplace going forward. And I just thought I'd start with that a little bit. Historically, we went from like 200 plus square foot an employee, and that kind of was cut in half over the years as we all work to work more efficiently. And I think de-densification of space will definitely continue for the foreseeable future, kind of setting up more of a hub and spoke kind of layout where you have satellite locations. Another point is that, remote strategies are not anything new, but obviously not everybody can work optimally from home. So, the workplace is not going away, it's just going to evolve and change. The other two key points they made was that the office is the material factor in recruitment and retention. And I think that'll come back to the forefront of people's minds as we move through this pandemic. And then the workplace is the silent partner to strategy and culture, which I found very interesting. And I think that is true. And we've all put a lot of time and resources into our space to make it a place where everybody can thrive. So I think those factors will stay. They'll just be evolving and changing and de-densifying. So there's kind of three phases to the reopening of our workplaces. I'll kind of break them down in the planning for return to work, which focuses more on facilities, bringing employees back to work, and then ongoing communication and monitoring. Slide. So when we talk about planning for return to work, one of the biggest factors is getting stakeholder communication together. You need to bring together all facets, many of whom are on this panel today, but you need to get all facets of your organization together and talking, HR and legal and every leader within your team, as it really is a system-wide coordinated effort to follow CDC guidelines and try to think of everything that's impacted by coming back to work under this environment. Slide. So again, when you're looking at returning to work for the facility, the stakeholder communication, reopening communication can't be stressed enough. It's so key to have continuous communication with employees, with tenants in your building, with the landlord. So one of the things that's really key is that you're speaking to the landlord and finding out what their standards are going to be for their building so that you can communicate that out and make plans that you need to adhere to the guidelines that are out there. Facility readiness is obviously the largest piece of the planning the return to work from a facility standpoint. And I'm going to turn it over to Susan, who is a project coordinator for our affiliated property management company. Susan, do you want to speak to some of the items to consider for facilities readiness? Susan?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. So procurement of cleaning supplies, that's definitely going to be challenging because there is a shortage of demand, but getting on that now or as soon as you can is key. Maybe a lot of you companies have already started to work with your janitorial company or work with your supply companies to get, leads on supplies, but we're finding that, having like sanitation units like placed around, departments is going to be key for employees. Having hand sanitizers in your common areas, if you don't have them already, adding them. Looking at, changing your work environment, your furniture. Maybe you're going to phase in your employees and have only 25% come in, 50% come, but maybe strategically spacing out employees based on where their workstations are located so that you can enforce that social distancing between, workstations and your coworkers. Some people are even adding some panels to their workstations to make them higher so that employees, are a little bit more protective from their coworkers. Even just having some protocols in place where only one person walks down an aisle at a time, so that you can keep that spacing. And then instead of having in-person meetings, just keep continuing to use technology, even if you're at the office for your meetings. As Darby said, communication is so large with this, and along with that is signage around your facility to let people know what the building standards are, what the employer is doing to protect employees, what they want employees to do to protect one another, and having that signage around is definitely going to be key with that. Slide.
Okay. So did you touch, so the other major thing with, preparing a system back to work then is, your mechanical systems, your HVAC and plumbing and water, you want to make sure that you're changing filters if the landlord agrees to that. If you're flushing out your water systems, you want to make sure that your janitorial contractor is up to date about what the CDC level of cleaning is needed in your facility. If you have, multiple restrooms and common areas and elevator buttons, how are those being cleaned throughout the day? You need to ask your vendors to share their safety plans. A lot of people are not going to allow vendors or visitors on site for the first 30 days. Susan mentioned signage, but what is the signage in and out of the building? What is the signage to the elevator? What's your capacity of your elevator? How many people? And once you establish that, then you need to communicate to the tenants in the building that only 2 people are allowed in the elevator at a time, that they can consider how that impacts their business. Do they have to stagger work times? Every building is unique. And then within common areas and amenities and mail rooms, there's how is it being cleaned? Are you providing gloves and masks for people that operate the mailroom? That's a recommendation. Are you leaving the mail for a day before it's touched at all? And then are you putting spacing, are you putting 6-foot floor spacing on the ground to identify how many people can be in a shared space, in a little cafe space at one time? How many people can be in the mailroom? How many people can be in a common area? Eliminating chairs so that you're setting people up 6 feet apart. Do people need to wear masks while they're in those common areas? And then who's responsible for cleaning them when they leave? A lot of places are not going to allow the use of conference rooms. They're only going to allow use of some of the microwave and refrigerator the first 30 days. And then who's cleaning that? People are removing shared utensils and shared condiments out of cafe spaces. And again, pulling out chairs and limiting the amount of people that are in there. And then we talked about occupancy levels, but again, it's occupancy within the elevators, within your conference rooms, within your shared space, within your break rooms, and having appropriate signage and communication around that. So, there's a lot of things to consider. And then, security and building access limitations. A lot of places are having one door to go in and one door to out. It depends on the traffic in the building. But it's a lot to, speak to and to get everybody on board about all the appropriate things that need to happen to safely bring people back to work. And the last piece of, communication and ongoing workplace management. So, there's going to be the first phase. A lot of people kind of have, here's what we're doing the first 30 days, and then we'll revisit it. But ongoing communication is key if you're going to lift restrictions or tighten restrictions because certain things aren't working. You need to do that. Another thing I forgot to mention was, temperature checks. Everybody has their own. A lot of people are saying, check your temperatures at home. Employees are required to do that. Some companies, depends on what the business is, are checking their temperatures at the door. What is your protocol for logging the employees that enter the building? What is your protocol for notifying if someone's been tested positive? So those are all things to consider as well. And then updating your emergency plan for virus resurgence. That's going to be a key piece as well. And then once you're in the ongoing monitoring communication, one thing to think about, someone said that, the return to work for employees can be like a TSA pre-check, where it's kind of, if you visualize a maddened sense of rush and chaos and in the airport, or it could be like checking into a 5-star hotel. So, people are going to be on edge. They're going to be unsure. Everyone's going to have a different feel about coming back. And so how you approach that can really put people at ease. And a lot of places are thinking about putting welcome kits that have supplies for their desk, that they don't have to go to the shared area to get supplies. And then, as Susan mentioned, having continuous cleaning supplies throughout the space and making sure you have the correct volume of that ongoing as the phases go on is going to be key. And who's responsible for that? Most people are going to have their employees cleaning their workstations throughout the day, and it's just going to be part of the lifespan going forward. But as the phases go on and as time goes on, the continuous communication will be so important. And that's it. On the last slide is just all the different resources that are out there that, the BOMA, Centers for Disease Control, OSHA, CBRE, American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers. There's a lot of resources out there specifically related to how to deal with COVID-19. I implore everyone to take a look at those. So thank you.
Hi, Brooke, you can start your presentation now.
Perfect, thank you. So good morning, everybody. My name is Brooke Smith. I have with me Len Summers and Jim Perino. We're going to talk to you a little bit about just touching more upon what CBRE was talking about with making sure that you have a plan in place. As everybody knows, with the start of the coronavirus, it has changed exponentially through the months that we've been dealing with this. As we keep going along, new information is being brought out. The CDC, the federal government, the county, and the state are all putting mandates in place to make sure that we're following through, we're keeping each other safe, and we're figuring out things to do with that. With that, we want to make sure that you guys are thinking about a plan in place in order to safely reopen your business. The transmission of how the COVID spreads, how things are transferred, being in close contact with one another, the different type of symptoms, we want to make sure that everybody keeps paying attention to that. You want to make sure that you have somebody that is staying abreast of all the information that is coming out, because it does seem to change on a daily basis. Next slide. Yeah, got it. So just some of the symptoms that you'd be looking for with the employees: the dry cough, the shortness of breath, fever, chills, repeated shaking with chills, muscle aches, headache, sore throat, recent loss of taste or smell. Again, the symptoms usually appear within 2 to 14 days after exposure. So making sure that you know you have a plan in place for if you have employees coming in, if you have people coming into the buildings, making sure that you're checking for these symptoms, doing wellness checks. Are you putting temperature checks in place? So one of the best ways to prepare to reopen is, first off, do you have a written plan in place? What is the plan that you are going to designate for your building, for your company, for your employees, for any of the patrons that may be coming into your building? Are you phasing people back into the building? CBRE touched on that, but how are you bringing people back in? Do you have a survey? Maybe you think about putting a survey out to your employees to find out who has the need to come back into the building first. Maybe they have a need for, copiers, mailing, making copies of things, printing items. So putting out a survey to best figure out what the needs are of your employees will help you phase people back in properly. It'll help assess any needs and concerns that your employees may have, and it'll help you address a better way and plan to put that back into place. Do you need to make physical changes to your office or work area? Maybe you had more of a cubicle style building. Maybe you need to move those cubes away from each other. Maybe you put in walkways where you have arrows. You have people walking down one aisle in one direction, and in the other aisle, they come in the other direction. What do you need to put in place? Do you need sanitizing stations? Do you have the guidelines in place to open properly and safely? I'm going to pass it over to Len, who's going to give you a little more information.
So thanks, Brooke. So looking at a return to work procedure and a health screening process for your employees is one of the critical elements. Obviously it's a requirement from the state now for every business that they're screening employees when they come to work and having a procedure in place for telling them and explaining to them what to do should they have symptoms and what types of symptoms to be looking for. So the first thing is you need to make sure you're communicating with them not to come to work if they have any fever symptoms, clearly if they've tested positive for COVID-19, and then having a return to work procedure after that, if we can get to the next slide. So having a return to work procedure in place that's documented. One of the key things that we're seeing as we're working with businesses that can both continue to work throughout this pandemic and businesses that have opened back up and are implementing things is making sure that this is clearly communicated to employees ahead of time and then reinforced. You want to make sure that employees are reminded often as to what the procedures are. So whatever you put in place, you want it to be something that's reinforced often with them. And so that they know clearly what the expectations are and who to contact and when to do so and what procedures to follow. So having a return to work procedure, this PowerPoint that we're sharing today is just an example of something that you could have together for employees for them to go through prior to returning to work in the initial phase of reopening. So it's clear to them what the process should be. Next slide, please. So getting into things like exactly if you've been determined that you potentially are still contagious, who to coordinate with prior to returning to work, and what is the gatekeeper process. So the CDC still has that you should receive 2 negative COVID tests in a row 24 hours or more apart prior to returning to work. And that should be clear to the employees who they need to coordinate with and what the process will be before they return to work. Next slide, please. So this, these would be some key elements to every work process or environment that we need to have in place to make sure that we're controlling the spread. So obviously social distancing is going to be part of our future for the foreseeable future until we have a vaccine out there. Personal hygiene, establishing with employees what the expectations are for their personal hygiene throughout the workday. Putting in some sort of surface sanitation process for both their personal space and obviously the work environment. That was already discussed in terms of making sure that we have appropriate cleaning supplies and antiseptic and hand washing and or hand sanitizing stations, put in place that are realistic for employees to use throughout the day. If we're encouraging people to wash their hands often, we need to make sure we're giving them the supplies that are spaced appropriately for them to do so. And then the last piece is face coverings. Implementing face coverings into your work environment. It's something we're having to work into our daily lives now as we go out into retail and community spaces. But having protocols set for how we expect employees to be using face coverings in the work environment. When do they need to have them on? When don't they need to have them on? And then how to put the face coverings on is also important, teaching people about the proper way to do it and what we expect them to do with reusable or disposable face coverings throughout the day. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of communication to employees, you know, so that they're understanding what the protocols are for their personal discipline and social distancing, and that, you know, we know this is going to be difficult at times, but we're depending on them, but giving them some guides in terms of what we expect. Next slide, please. Again, reinforcing how we expect them to go about sanitizing their hands, when we expect them to do those, making sure they're using tissues, using their elbow coughing when they're coughing or sneezing. So giving those guides to employees as to what we expect in the work environment. Next slide. So this would be an example of face covering protocols that I was talking about. So giving people an idea of when we are expecting them to use it, how they should be put on. In the next slides, we'll have one for doffing and donning face coverings to make sure that they're educated as to how we expect them to use them. But first and foremost, face coverings are not a substitute for social distancing. So that's our first line of defense, is keeping people away from each other, keeping that density down in the workplace. But when that is not possible, or there's a likelihood of people getting in close proximity to each other, that these face covers are our second line of defense. Next slide. So reopening by phases, of course, there are different phases that have been established, and it looks like there's some negotiating going on at the state level in terms of who's in the next grouping of phases, but staying abreast of what the phases are and when it's appropriate by region for manufacturers and retail and construction to be opening. Next slide. So in phase 2 right now, professional services will not be open. Retail, administrative support, real estate and rental and leasing. And in phase 3, they're not open right now, but restaurants and food services are currently listed to be in phase 3. Although I hear there's some back and forth in terms of negotiating, trying to get them to move into phase 2 in a reduced capacity. So that may be something that we're seeing. Next slide. Phase 4 right now is arts, entertainment, recreation, and education. So that would be the last grouping that we should see as far as businesses reopening. And next slide.
And now we'll move on to Jim Farino, who is going to talk a little bit about employer liability.
Morning, folks. I hope everyone is doing well there. To echo a lot of what you already heard, I'm going to address more than just your employees, but I also like to address your tenants and general public that will come onto your property, and to help avoid some possible liability exposures, because as we all know, the best type of claim is the one that doesn't happen. The key elements, as you've already heard, is to provide a safe environment to any employees, tenants, or the general public to your property, is to make sure you're following the CDC and OSHA guidelines clearly. Many employers are requiring, before they allow their employees to return to work, to complete or sign a return to work agreement that clearly outlines what's expected of them and what they're expected to follow when they do return to the work environment. We've all seen probably the footage and heard the stories of the restaurants that opened, and there was no social distancing going on. Nobody was wearing masks. They were clearly overpopulated. There's manufacturing plants where only 20% of the people were following the proper safety guidelines given to them. They weren't using the PPE that was provided, and then 40 or 50 of the workers became infected with COVID-19. So I can't emphasize that enough. One of the things that we tell our clients, as you get ready to return people to your employment, to your property, your customers, it's important to keep a log detailing when you're doing your cleaning and disinfecting, what's being followed. Should a claim arise, at least that will show the due diligence that you've used in keeping your environment as clean as possible and as safe as possible for everybody. If you already don't know, all businesses that are getting ready to reopen are required to have a written safety plan in place. And you can either have your own written safety plan in place, or if you go to the Department of Health, there is a New York Forward Business Reopening Safety Plan template that you can fill out and use as a guide to have, because if the Department of Health or any other safety official comes onto your site, they're going to ask for that copy of your safety plan that you have in place. So I can't emphasize that enough. And any managers or supervisors that you're training to carry out the safety plan, you have to make sure you deliver a clear, concise message to employees and what's to be expected, what's to be followed. And the key part of that isn't to just deliver the message, it's to make sure the proper protocol is being followed and adhered to. Because you could have the best safety plan in place, but if you're not adhering to it, it's not going to be really worth the paper it's printed on, and it's going to expose you to additional liabilities and potential claims against yourself. So that's mainly what I had to cover here today. If you want to go to the next slide and the next speaker, that would be great. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tracy Lepardi, and I'm going to be presenting with Matt Emons, who is at HB Cornerstone. And HB Cornerstone is a subsidiary of Harris Beach, and so we have the benefit where we are able to speak regarding the legal issues and some of the other components as we help our clients navigate the return to work aspects, because there certainly are many of them, as we've already heard. So certainly, I think everyone's aware that there is no limit on the number of employees that can be returned for phase one as it is right now, but New York State does recommend a phased-in approach, and certainly, you know, that would be a best practice as well too. We've heard certainly a great deal about the plan from several of the other speakers. There is the New York State template along with CDC and OSHA guidelines. I would strongly recommend that you take a look at that template and those templates to make sure that you are addressing what all of those items, almost as like a checkoff, have them all in front of you, check them off for your own plan. If you're adhering to those plans and using the templates, that's certainly going to help you in any kind of legal defense issues, you know, that may come up from there too. Keep in mind with the policy, it does not need to be submitted to the state. However, what does need to be submitted to the state is an affirmation that there is a plan in place. Your plan also does need to be posted and readily available at your place of work. Many of our clients are making sure that they also provide a return to work plan to their employees. So I think that's, you know, certainly a good communication tool as well, along with, before the folks even return to work, having like a PowerPoint going through what is planned when they come back, so that individuals are not so concerned about coming back, and you will hear those, and we're going to talk about those in greater detail. But I think the communication is so key with regard to what your opening plan is before your employees get there, and so they actually have a chance to kind of comprehend and process it, because there certainly, you know, are a lot of things going on for various individuals under, you know, these unfortunate times right now. As part of the plan, you do want to make sure that you're looking at your different policies from an HR and legal standpoint, whether it's for, teleworking, telecommuting, who's going to be able to work from home, who is not, the PTO policies, PPEs as well that are going to be provided. Let me just go back to for a minute too, as far as the employees and the plans and what the employees have to do. One of the recommendations that I heard Jim mention too is have your employees, confirm that they're going to adhere to that. That is extremely important. In fact, many employers are having their employees click off, on a box as soon as they clock into work or on their computer screen. Several other clients and employers are addressing these screening questions that are required by the New York State template through an app. So there's different ways that you certainly can go about doing that, but screening is absolutely required. Not necessarily temperature checks, but some type of screening is required. With regard to who's returning, the selection process absolutely needs to be consistent and transparent. You certainly do not want to have any type of age-based decisions and not returning your older workforce because of concerns. You want to avoid any type of disparate treatment or impact claims, and that will definitely come into play with regard to who's returning, first and how they're being phased in as well. So you really want to make sure that you look at all those factors. As it pertains to the medical testing and inquiries, I'm sure you've heard by now, but the EEOC does permit employers taking employees' temperatures. So that is a change from what the EEOC previously allowed because they now find it to be job-related and consistent. But with regard to the consistency, you want to make sure that you're consistent in your practice. You're also not just taking the temperatures, of your older workers or certain individuals who you believe, may be out and about more, maybe you see them on social media or what have you. So again, want to make sure that that's consistent. And as the New York State template also references, screening is absolutely required. With regard to the temperatures, while you do want to log in your cleaning protocols and logging in that your employees have affirmed that they received a copy of the opening plan and agreed to adhere to it, you do not want to log employee temperatures at all. So the only thing that you do want to do is have a yes to the county health department. Some employers are looking at what the employee number is, and that would only stay with HR. And so that's, an important aspect too when we're talking about the temperatures, also other symptoms as well too. When you're asking about different screening questions as well, you do not want to limit the screening questions to just with regard to, the health of an individual's family. If you do that, that could be a violation of GINA, which is the Genetic Information and Non-Discrimination Act. That's a federal law. So rather, you can ask, the employee if they've been in contact with anyone who's been diagnosed with COVID or who have had symptoms of COVID too. So you still get to the point that you want to as well. Any type of information, regarding your yes of your employees, testing positive or anything, along those lines pertaining to medical, absolutely need to be kept in separate medical files, not in the individual's personnel files. When we're talking about temperature checks or any kind of screening too, we do want to make sure that it is a concise process. We don't want any of the employers to get into situations where employees can claim any type of wage and hour issues because they were in line waiting to get their temperature checked for 15 or 20 minutes and weren't paid for that time. So typically donning and doffing is paid for when we're dealing with PPEs, but I'm sure that's going to be a whole other set of case law and claims that will come up. There are several situations that we're hearing with employees who are refusing to return to work or requesting accommodations. Just so you know, certainly depending on who the individual is, their level of comfort or fear coming into work is going to vary. And so all of those circumstances really need to be addressed on a case-by-case basis because those factual situations will be different. So if an individual simply says, I'm too fearful to come in, I don't want to come in, you basically can require them to come in. Otherwise, you can discipline them. However, there's caveats with that. You want to look at why they're saying they're not coming in. Do they have a concern because they're a vulnerable employee? And that's actually defined under federal law with regard to certain types of conditions that they have. Do they have an individual who's in their household that they're concerned about too? Otherwise, if it is a situation where they simply don't, want to come in, while that might not be covered, the EEOC and even New York State is saying, listen, work with individuals. This is a really tough time. See what kind of accommodations you can make with those individuals. Have that interactive, the discussion process with regard to how we can go about doing this. Now, of course, you do need to make sure that you can, operate your business. So that might be a different situation if we're just talking about a fear aspect. But so basically, while fear is not a qualifying reason, for a leave, especially under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, or excuse me, especially under the FFCRA or other laws, consider disability, Family Medical Leave Act. But if there's no other disability or serious health condition, then they're not entitled to leave. Again, you want to conduct that individualized assessment. Again, want to make reasonable accommodations if needed because of a disability that would not impose an undue hardship on the company. Undue hardship is a very high standard, so you just want to be very careful in that regard as far as relying on an undue hardship. Certainly, individuals can continue teleworking if that works for all of you folks and based on what the position is for the individual. Of course, making sure we have some consistency, some type of policy with regard to who is able to do that as well. If you are going to let individuals telework after your business is open, you might want to consider indicating that that is a type of accommodation and it is a temporary accommodation. Because otherwise, and we are expecting claims that because employees worked from home during the pandemic, the continued work from home is a reasonable accommodation. In the past, oftentimes it was not reasonable to have individuals work from home. So those are the types of claims that we definitely will expect to see in the employment law context. Again, older employees, they absolutely cannot be barred or excluded solely on the basis of their age. The EEOC just made that very clear in some guidance about a week ago in that regard too. While you might be concerned just from a human standpoint of individuals and older workers, you cannot exclude them on that basis. That also brings up some other, individuals who might be in more of a vulnerable category, pre-existing conditions. So again, you want to look at, what you know about those individuals. Again, not making any assumptions, but speaking with those individuals that either come to you or that you're aware of to see how you can accommodate them, what their comfort level is. Again, having those discussions with them. I think a big issue that's going to be coming up, especially in the summer, is childcare. Keep in mind that under the federal law, the FFCRA, there is a provision that allows individuals leaves, and it's at 2/3 pay with regard to an individual whose daycare is closed or school is closed, and that's even for individuals who are under the age of 18. So definitely something to keep in mind with regard to the summertime. But one way to address these types of leaves that your employees might be requesting is any type of, flex schedule that could be, worked out with this particular individual. Can they work on certain days rather than, not being able to come in all days? Or can they telework 2 days a week and come in the office 3 days a week? So some other, again, matters that you want to ensure that are treated consistently and also absolutely documented. Any type of these kind of accommodations and discussions, you will want to do that. You might also hear some individuals who indicate they don't want to wear a mask. Certainly you can require that under Executive Law 20216. That is required for customers and members of the public. And if socially distancing is not feasible, certainly you can require that. Something to think about as well, though, if an individual indicates they're unable to do so because of a religious issue or medical issue, again, you need to discuss that with them. Maybe that's not appropriate for the individual then to be on the work site, or you put them in some type of area so that they won't come in contact with other individuals too. Certainly some other issues that are going to be coming up are various potential litigation issues, whether it's harassment. I would suggest that you communicate, upfront with your employees, reminding them that fear of COVID should not be misdirected against an individual because of their protected characteristic, including national origin or race. Denials of accommodations, leave, or paid leave certainly is a concern. I mentioned some wage claims. Also, certainly OSHA is going to be a concern with regard to employees who believe they were infected while working, whether it's OSHA or workers' comp claims. So again, wanting to make sure that you address those matters, you document those types of situations. OSHA also did just rescind their guidance. On May 19th, they provided guidance in April regarding that that a case is work-related as defined by the federal regs would not include COVID. They reversed course on that just a couple of days ago. So you want to, make sure that that is also documented, even though we know how community spread can take place, throughout regular, shopping stores and things along those lines too. Certainly you can have some defenses. There's not a sufficient nexus between the infection and any specific employer-related contact, any type of conduct. But the more the employer adheres to the applicable federal, state, and local health and safety requirements, the stronger is going to have a defense for that particular case or cases. So in that regard, I want to turn it over to Matt again, who's at HB Cornerstone, a subsidiary over at Harris Beach, and he could talk more and expand on the return to work, some of the accommodations that I started speaking about as it pertains more so with regard to the physical accommodations.
Great, thanks, Tracy. And thanks, Seth. And I'll say slide probably twice, I think, Seth. Yep, one more. So I think everyone, going last is a good thing and a bad thing. So the good thing is I'm going to summarize a lot of the things that people, I was going to summarize a lot of the things that we've already heard today. So I think I'm going to go a little bit off slide here and talk about what HB Cornerstone, as an owner's rep and experienced design firm, is uniquely positioned to help our clients return to work. And in what we've got up here today is a general outline for the planning process. And everybody from Darby, down to the rest of the team, Brooke and Len here, have all touched on this, and Tracy's points about the legal mandates. We talk on the slide here about the review of state mandates and guidelines. There was a lot of good references earlier in the presentation of what guidelines and what websites and who we should be listening to. The other one that Tracy just mentioned is also OSHA. They've got a great guideline book out that talks about some things that you're going to see on here under the return to work plan. So I'm jumping around a little bit, but what we've done is with HB Cornerstone is we've already become part of that return to work team with some of our clients, some of our existing clients, and also some new ones. And really, that we're seeing that COVID response team or that return to work team is including legal, HR, and other consultants. It may be contractors that you're friendly with and are already working on projects with, and also architects, engineers, et cetera. So reviewing those state mandates and guidelines, we all know that stuff's ever changing. We've got to stay on top of that. So building the return to work plan and policy, and a policy to reopen is what everyone's talking about today. So we've actually been, like I said, working with clients to do this. And how we're doing that is we're developing risk overlay plans. So we're taking drawings and tours of buildings or buildings that we already know, clients that we've already been through their space and we know their space, we're familiar with it. And we're doing a risk overlay plan. That risk overlay plan is going to identify high risk areas, medium risk areas, and low risk areas. And then what we're able to do is help determine what those physical modifications to a building or a tenancy may be. So those are the engineering controls or the physical improvements, as we're all familiar with it. A work scope drawing that shows how and where we're going to do those improvements. So OSHA talks about engineering controls and administrative controls. We've talked about both of those in today's presentation. And engineering control, like I said, is actually changing something. It's putting a plexiglass shield on a reception desk. It's reorganizing furniture, things like that. The other thing, and actually Darby spoke about the hub and spoke. We do have clients that are actually interested in reorganizing furniture in open office areas where they can afford, to do that financially, and they have the space to do it. So that's something that we're working with them on. The other thing that we're doing is when we do this risk overlay plan or these occupancy analysis plans, we're seeing where the issues are. And then we're able to help that client determine, what do we need to do? Do we put an engineering control in place? And if we can't put an engineering control in place, we need to put an administrative control in place. And that's when HR and legal are going to come into play, and they're going to say, you know, and you guys will appreciate this, you know, we can't block off a door that's an egress door, right? That's going to be a legal issue. That's an exiting issue. However, maybe we can make a hallway a one-way traffic, or we determine that we're not going to seat people in certain areas. And we've talked about the phased reopening, and what we're seeing with a lot of our clients as we work with them on these return to work plans is that they're actually phasing and staging their own reopening. They're using those surveys that we talked about earlier, and we've got that on our slide here with a survey of employees and managers, is to figure out what are the limiting factors? What's making, other than occupancy issues with restrooms and other things, what are your limiting factors? And that survey is going to help you determine that. So we've seen HR teams, you know, senior managers, management teams develop those and get those sent out. Also legal, obviously reviewing those. And like I said, that's how we're helping these clients build these return to work plans. So I think we're fortunate enough with some existing clients and some new ones, as I mentioned, that are probably either, you know, your tenants possibly, or also other developers in the region where we're able to assist and help them prepare the building, but also prepare their tenant space. So, and like I said, there's a lot of stuff here, but I think we've kind of touched on it, and I know Seth would probably like to get to some Q&A, so more than happy to answer some other questions. But I think with our experience, we're uniquely positioned here to help our existing clients and also new clients really build that return to work plan and implement these things and put them in place. So thanks, Seth.
And thank you so much. And I want to thank all the panelists today from CBRE, Lawley, Harris Beach, and HP Cornerstone for their expert takes on this ongoing and ever-changing process. We don't have any Q&As, but I do want to ask one, and it's logistical and it's short term. So the return to work plan is necessary. It should be shared with employees, and it should be readily available to the public. Where does the certification need to be sent? That's a question that's come up, and I think it's worth talking of where should the certification of the plan being completed be sent?
So I'll jump in here. This is Tracy. Actually, if you look at the New York State website in that regard too, there is the affirmation section of that. And at the link below, or I'm actually reading from it right now too, it references that you can affirm at a particular link as well. So it's a fill-in document from there as well that allows you to submit it. So basically you put in, you know, some of the basics, the name, the address, and then the affirmation is I'm the owner or agent, or reviewed the guidance for businesses, affirm I've read and understand my obligation to operate. So after you fill that out, you can just literally press the submit button. I would always suggest that you print that out. Maybe you do a print screen. I don't know what happens once you submit it, only because I have not done that for a particular business. But I think you definitely want to have the documentation. But that is right on there as part of the New York Forward website through the New York State Governor's Office.
Thank you very much. And again, I want to thank all of our presenters today and everyone for being a part of this call. I want to thank, as always, our DAC sponsors, Community Preservation Corporation, First Amherst Construction Exchange of Buffalo and Western New York, Harris Beach PLLC, and our supporting sponsors, ARC Building Partners, CBRE Buffalo, LaBella Associates, LaChase Construction Services, Millington Lockwood, National Grid, and the Bondeo Group. Also, if anyone has any questions after this presentation, we encourage you to go to the BNP business link on our website, thepartnership.org. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
You too, Seth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, folks.